All right. Welcome to our final episode of the Perspective series this February. Today's work is hybrid. So, in our first two episodes, we focused a lot on bringing the whole person into the workplace. What can leaders do in this hybrid environment? I brought on Michelle Anhang, a certified coach, to talk especially about our preferences and boundaries and how important it is to identify those and share them with one another so we can work better together. And in last week's episode, Amanda Lobo, our chief of staff here at Thoughtium, we talked a lot about how we bring the whole person to work at Thoughtium in a hybrid setting. And hopefully, our viewers got a lot of tidbits from that to take with them into their teams. But good news is the learning and application does not stop there. We have a toolkit coming with TypeCoach materials, which you'll hear more on that in a bit from our co-founders of TypeCoach, today's guest speakers. So not only do I have one founder, but I have the other as well joining us, Carly and Rob Toomey, the co-founders of TypeCoach. And let's welcome them on in. Hi, Carly. Hi, Rob.
Hey, great to be here.
Great to have you guys. I know you just got, let me take a moment to create the space for how we're arriving. I know you guys just got back from an awesome trip in Costa Rica. What else? How else are you guys coming in today?
Excited. I mean, we love our partnership with Thoughtium, and so it's exciting to be able to have a conversation with you today.
Yeah. How about with you, Rob? How are you showing up?
Sentiment. Yeah, totally excited to be here. It's been a very crazy, fun, busy start to the year. So this is a lot of good stuff to catch up on.
Yeah, and I know before we went live, we had a few moments to touch base that, Rob, you're already in the headspace of sharing how TypeCoach is, being brought to life more in the hybrid world in this kind of podcast, virtual roundtable discussion. So it's great to know your head's in that place, and me and Carly are just here to keep up with you. Awesome. Well, to get started, I know some of our viewers have an idea of what TypeCoach is, some don't. So if you guys could, one, tell us, what is TypeCoach, and also how you guys brought it into fruition as the founders.
I'll leave Carly.
No? It's all me. No, you go for it.
So Carly and I have been both in this business and married for just around 20 years. And we started the business because we wanted to follow our passion for the topic of personality type. We started out doing live training and coaching, and then it's gradually sort of morphed into what it is now, which is a mix of online tools that practitioners can use with their clients, as well as a lot of direct training. I think one of the fun things for us has been making personality type practical. So moving it into the context of interpersonal communication has really been our main focus over the years.
I love that, especially the practicality piece, because I know with a psychology background, I'm close to the more what people call the social and soft sciences, excuse me. But you bringing that practicality and like true application, because let's be honest, everyone has a personality. Let's start talking about it and make space for it. Yeah. Awesome. Well, let's get started with, why TypeCoach? Why are we bringing it to the forefront, and how is it offering like a new lens to how we have preferences and what you're seeing that look like with your clients in the marketplace?
You want to go, Carly?
Sure. So we work with a lot of companies globally who are looking for leadership training or manager training or sales training or for teams to work better together. So what we do is help them transform their relationships with each other, with their clients, to take into account the different personalities. Instead of treating everyone the way that they would want to be communicated with, they communicate differently. We teach them to communicate differently with different personality types. So managers can manage to different types, and colleagues on a team can adjust their approach, whether they're giving more details or less details, whether they're diving into the pros and cons, or whether they're getting more into the impact on people, whether they're pushing for closure, or whether they're easing into that part of the conversation. How fast-paced all of those things are coming into play when people are considering adapting their communication.
Yeah, and for me, the theme of what you've just shared, it's finding that balance and how do you naturally show up, and also identifying and recognizing that who you're talking to and who's in the room may not be coming in that same way, and making space for that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's easy to communicate with people who are really similar to you. And, those are the people you sit next to on the plane and you just get into a conversation. It just flows naturally. And so I think we do is we expand the scope of people that you can have that kind of rapid connection and rapport with and communicate more effortlessly with. It also builds tolerance. So, often with differences in personality type, you can think it's almost the other person's doing it intentionally to thwart you. They're stalling and they're not giving you the closure you want on purpose, or they're giving you just like no details for just because they know you want details or something like that. And then what you realize when you learn these different personalities is it is actually who they are. It's wired into what's natural for them, what they most want to focus on first. For Rob and myself, there's often this tension between me wanting to dive into the details earlier than he wants to. He wants to kind of throw out a big picture idea, get excited about it, get me excited about it. And the first thing I do is ask him a bunch of specific how questions and how could that work and what are the logistics of that. And that's what I need in order to get excited about his idea. And, it's draining and exhausting for him. It's like you're just putting a pin in my balloon. I haven't figured all that out. Like, can we just say high level for a minute? So I think it makes you more tolerant of those differences in each other.
I love that. Anything from you, Rob, to emphasize or expand upon?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that Carly and I would have been successful in our business without understanding these dimensions. One of the fun things for us is that client conversations we're having right now are very different than pre-pandemic, where we had to sort of showcase our work to get them to understand the value and relevance of it. Whereas now it's like they're looking for anything that will help the teams communicate more effectively, because the new ways of working and frankly, the amount of stress that people are under has really eroded the trust and the collaboration and the communication to the point where they are very aware of the challenge that they're facing and the need is very apparent to them.
I'm glad that's where we're heading in this direction. I'm glad you brought up how it's looking a bit different in the hybrid space. Because what has it been 11 years and then some that TypeCoach has been around,
We
roughly?
started 19 years ago, but then
Oh wow,
the
okay.
current formulation is about 10 years old.
Okay, fair enough. So, regardless, way before the pandemic hit and things shifted into the hybrid, more virtual world. So, in addition, I'd love to hear from you both. What are you seeing? How is it affecting individuals differently, and maybe at the team levels? With how TypeCoach is maybe looking and feeling a bit different, and how it's supporting folks in the hybrid world.
So I'll dive right in. So one of the first things we witnessed during we were living in Spain when the Spanish lockdown happened, and the world was turned upside down, and we all on our team had different responses to it. And it's really interesting to see that those patterns were pretty clear based on personality differences. So for me, given my personality, I was kind of exhilarated or excited about the opportunity that shakeup represented for us with our clients to get them to do new ways of doing work, to get them to consider things. But I looked around at the rest of my team, Carly included, and they were not excited and exhilarated at all. It was much more of a terrified sort of like, whoa, what's going to happen here response. And so I think that's one of the sort of interesting phenomenon that occurs with personality. There's the same stimuli, but there's a very different response to it. And so being aware of those responses allows me to be much more empathetic about why they're feeling stressed and overwhelmed, where I'm feeling positive and excited. And that hasn't really shifted, right? So as we've gone through the last 2.5 years, people's responses continue to be really different. Some people are loving working on Zoom and Teams. Other people, it's the last thing that they want. And there's some pretty clear patterns in the personalities.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'd love to get your, not to go too deep into the dimensions, but let's dive, I guess, a little bit in. Let's scratch the surface, if you will. So if we think about, I think a big component are our feelers out there. So for those who aren't familiar, feelers versus thinkers, these are our tendencies and how we like to make decisions. So yes, we throughout the day will switch between one and the other. And also with, those big tough decisions, we will think, okay, how is this logically going to play out? And also how is this going to impact others? I'd love to hear, how has this affected our decision making and more of the feelers out in the world?
So I think what we are hearing from feelers on a really regular basis is that they miss the connection they were able to form with people in person. It's just there's more opportunities when you're in the same building and having lunch in the same room and you're walking past each other left and right. There's just so many more opportunities to feel connected on a personal level, and even on a professional level, than there is when you're jumping on a quick call and you have an agenda and you get through your agenda and then you're zipping off to your next call. And it sort of, you have to make an extra effort to sort of catch people, to have a little bit of a personal conversation, and it's just not nearly as comfortable. I mean, when you're in person, it's awkward not to have those personal conversations, and it's almost flipped so that now when you're virtual, it's almost awkward to ask for those. People are so busy back-to-back Zooms.
Yeah, you don't have a digital or virtual water cooler like we used to have in person. So I'd love to hear from both of you. What recommendations or tips do you have for our viewers where we can't obviously change the environment that we're in, but what can we do to make space for not just our feelers, but more of that personal connection?
Well, just funny that you mentioned water cooler. We actually recommend that teams create an instant message. We use Slack. Other teams use a different instant message DM approach, and it's a water cooler channel, right? Because you have multiple channels, and so we have one. We just call it water channel. Water cooler. What am I talking about? Water cooler, and then everyone just puts pictures of their trips and pictures of their kids, and things that you would do in person. You'd be showing people if you were in person. They're putting them in there. No work in that channel. And we have another one. I think what feelers are also missing is a lot of positive feedback. So I think that you get more positive feedback when you're in person than you do virtually, just the nature of the situation. So people are sending off emails and messages with like, oh, can you adjust this? Can you tweak that? And they don't always take the time to give that, this is looking awesome, great job on this, as they would if they were in person. You wouldn't walk up to someone's desk and be like, hey, can you tweak this? You would give them a bunch of positive. So we have another channel where we have, we call it props. And so you put in there any shout outs, any feedback that you get from other people outside the team, anything that kind of props people up, we throw it in there. And we also encourage people to make an extra effort to give more positive feedback than they have been giving virtually, probably.
I love that because it's also strengthening that muscle, that habit of continuing to do it. So just those little reminders I know goes a super long way. Yeah. That's awesome. I guess another question for you along those lines. Extroverts and introverts. I said we weren't going to get into dimensions, and here we go. But I imagine that both sides of that dimension, which for those who don't know, this is how we gain our energy. Extroverts get it from other people, being in stimulated, let's call it places, where introverts prefer more to have that relaxed, calming, quiet place of reflection where they gain their energy. And I love pointing out the myth. Well, how about Carly, Rob, the myth with introverts versus extroverts? Will you share with the group and crack that for them?
Go ahead, Rob.
Sure. I mean, most people conflate it with social skills and social graces when it's not about that at all. You can have the introvert who's the life of the party, who's very comfortable in that circumstance. The only difference is during the process, their batteries levels are going down as opposed to the extroverts going up. That's the only difference. And so I think a lot of people, when they go through our program, are kind of surprised where their outcome might be different than they thought in either direction, when they understand that it's not about the social element. Well, I grew up in a really social family. We're always out doing stuff, but at the end of the night, I'm beat. That's a good signal for introversion. So it's a natural starting point.
Mm-hmm. And when we think about extroverts and introverts in the hybrid world, how are you seeing that play a role in, I guess, dynamics and collaboration?
It's a little bit more subtle than I think people think, right? So everyone's like, oh, introverts must like this and extrovert. So what we're finding is that while introverts are very much appreciative of being able to get, just to turn off the screen and to have the alone time versus sitting in an open office plan, right? Where they're like, oh my gosh, I'm just surrounded by people all day long. So they like that. On the other hand, especially, when we were first getting our legs under us with working from home, a lot of introverts felt like their family was in their workspace all of a sudden. And that was not good at all, because on the one hand, I don't have my colleagues, but now my kids are right over here, and that's just as much, if not more, of a sort of a drain. And so, like, we've seen a lot of introverts reporting that creating me time for themselves has been really, really important. Space where they're not surrounded. On the extrovert side, yeah, I mean, they're not thrilled with the Teams and Zoom environment. And in fact, it doesn't count for the same level of emotional energy producing connection when you're with someone on Zoom or Teams or whatever. We think it's like 50 to 60% of the same sort of electricity. So even just going to a Starbucks and sitting around people produces more restoring energy for the extroverts than doing, a 2-hour Zoom where they're face to face.
Fascinating. And I love that you guys bring in the neuroscience behind it, because oftentimes we think of like personality and preferences and all of that, again, as like a soft subject that we have some idea about, but really it connects back to our brain wiring. And I know, Carly, you spoke to that earlier. So I guess along those lines, I'd love for you guys to talk about, how does TypeCoach differ, especially from MBTI? So I know we have clients who come forward and, I'm not too interested. We've already gone through this assessment. How is it any different? So I have, my 2 cents to share, but I'd love to hear from you two how you approach that conversation.
Okay, so the Myers-Briggs is the same. We're using the same framework as the Myers-Briggs. It's Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist, came up with this sort of model or framework of understanding different personality types, and the part of our personality types that's kind of wired in from the start. And so the Myers-Briggs is really refers to this questionnaire. It's like 140 multiple choice questions, and there are a lot of other ways to figure out your personality type, and there's a lot of thousands of books written on the topic. And you can't copyright a framework or a model or way of thinking about people. So TypeCoach is just an alternate approach to figuring out your personality type. And instead of doing a questionnaire, what we have you do is that same 20-25 minutes, you're watching some videos about extroversion, introversion, you're sliding sliders. It's presenting to you your most likely type description. You're getting a chance to read that. And then there are definitely parts of it that wouldn't resonate if it wasn't quite your type. And then it's going to pull up your second most likely. You get a chance to read that one. And then if you're still not sure, there's like another rabbit hole you can go down. And at the end of the day, you download your 8-page report. So it's a little bit of a different approach than the Myers-Briggs to discover your type. And then I think that the differences continue because we really focus on the application of type. So we see that as really just the starting point, the pre-work. And then everything we do after that, the training and the tools that we offer on our platform are all about how do you apply this in your everyday interactions? How do you improve your interactions with your colleagues, your boss, your direct reports, your clients? How do you motivate people differently, give feedback differently, give instructions differently? And so we have, for example, a type-to-type tool. And you can see your whole team in there. You can click on each other, get advice for working with Janet, based on your type and Janet's type. So we're really all about that practical application.
You have my wheels turning. I guess my more short-term question, how often do you two look at the type-to-type tool for one another?
So not often enough.
Good question.
Yeah. So I think what's interesting is as the learning journey progresses, the material becomes second nature, right? And so what happens for people who've been through the material a lot, and certainly that counts for both Carly and I, is when we start to feel that friction or that tension emerging, we can identify the source of it being a difference in that personality piece and say, all right, what are we both going to do to navigate this more effectively? As opposed to what most people do when they don't have that framework, which is it becomes a tug of war. It's like, no, you do it my way. No, I'm going to do it your way. And it's not a very efficient way to navigate.
Or I think people often just think that guy's an idiot, right? Like they think there's something wrong with the other person.
I mean, I'm right here.
Yeah, I totally get that. It's what TypeCoach does. It provides the platform for communication. It's that you guys call it an adaptive communication system, which it so much is in real time, because you're creating space to name preferences and behaviors, not point fingers. Oh, you're being this way, and you are this sort of person. It's well, we all have our preferences, tendencies. Let's name it. And, without judgment, it's a relief. I'll say that much. When I went through my TypeCoach certification and got very close to how you guys approach personality type and preferences and bringing it towards teams, it's, yes, identifying like how you naturally show up, but creating that space for communication with one another to name like my strengths, weaknesses, yours, and let's find that middle ground so we can show up for one another and best for ourselves.
Yeah, and leverage each other's strengths. There's so many situations where one person's dirty laundry that they don't want to do is what the other person is energized by, right? And so when you discover those, in an ideal world, you have a mix of types on a team, and there is no better or worse on any of these. So, a lot of assessments out there, and we're not an assessment, but a lot of others, there is sort of a better or worse. And so we always like to sort of mention, in this situation, this model, there isn't. You really want to mix the diversity, it's cognitive diversity, right? And it can really help bridge the gaps with other forms of diversity. Because if you're super different than someone else in your culture, your gender, your race, your age, and then you can click on them in your type to type tool and get advice for working with them based on your type and their type. It would take you a long time to figure out all that information about someone who's very different from you. And so it's a nice shortcut to bridge the gap for other forms of diversity as well.
Yeah. And go ahead, Rob. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to add one thing. So one of my favorite feedbacks that we get from participants in our program who are more experienced in their career, 20 plus years in, they'll often come up and say, when I look back at the people that I really struggled with from a working relationship with, or even people that I had to let go, they'll say things, and it's usually a little bit more private, like, that was on me. Like, I didn't know how to deal with that person. I didn't know how to bring up their best. I didn't know how to communicate, give them feedback, whatever. And they own the fact that if they had known more about how to deal with that person, they could have leveraged that and gotten the input and perspective and the strengths of that person who was probably very different from them and integrate that. And so that's part of what we're after, is that integration of that diverse personality and perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that definitely strikes a chord for my experience with working with different people and not being familiar with this content. And I want to share to the viewers, Rob is super correct in saying, it's part on us to recognize like there's this friction and we should call it out. I also want to go one step further and say it's communication that's two-way street. So maybe it was a self-awareness thing on their side as well, that they weren't noticing the conflict and didn't want to speak up.
I love that principle is really important for me. And in fact, one of the things that I'm trying to, with the workshops that I'm doing, and I know Carly does the same thing with hers, is empower people who are, sort of understanding this framework to then go out and educate their colleagues on what their needs are. Right. So, because it is a two-way street, and be like, hey, look, if you want to get the best out of me, it's really important that you start with the big picture context before we get into those specifics, so that I can really, really engage. And that's a very healthy conversation to be having.
I think that sort of ties into the what drives and motivates different temperaments. And there are
we're going into the temperaments. Yes.
Yeah, I was just gonna just sort of like touch on it briefly because we don't want to try to teach a whole class in a 40-minute talk, but there you can take the different types and put them into these 4 different groups, and they're very differently motivated, very differently. Their identities are wrapped up in very different things. And so if you understand about the people you work closely with, and certainly the people you live with, it can make a huge difference in explaining why they make a lot of the decisions they make, what they focus on, what's important to them. It just opens up a whole level of understanding in a really short amount of time. I mean, our temperament program is like 2 hours, and it can be a game changer to really understand that about people. What's their identity wrapped up in?
Yeah. It goes so much more beyond the 4 letters. It's the combination that is the unlock. And I remember being so locked into my training in temperaments. It got me super excited. And to know that this idea of there being like 4 rough buckets of folks has been around since
Hippocrates.
The Native
Americans.
A long time ago. Yeah, absolutely. We have a question. Curious on how Rob and Carly may have used TypeCoach with their team and the impact that's had on the culture they are building. We've seen the power of demonstrating our practices internally. Thank you, Norm Ralph, for that one.
Good one. Well, I love it. And we actually have a very virtual team. We've got someone in Canada, someone in Turkey who used to live in Florida, all over. Like there's about 8 of us, and we're in all different places. And we just got together in person. And first of all, I just want to say how amazing and different it is to be in person. Like it's so worth the time and energy and cost to get everybody together. And we actually we have a new team program, and we put ourselves through that team program, and we actually stood up and got in the line, like strongest extrovert to strongest introvert. We placed ourselves, and we had a whole discussion around how that plays out on our team, and same thing with the other dimensions. And, we could have gone all day like that. It was really a fun and I think really insightful conversation to have. And, of course, we all know each other's types, and we all know type very well, but we hadn't done some of those in-person kind of activities that, bring up different conversations. And, there's a lot of ahas that come out, and we spend a lot of time on our team making sure that people are doing the work that's most energizing to them. And there's a lot of flexibility about, is this sort of a Nicole project or a Julie project or a Shauna project? And it's a lot based on who's got a lot of energy for that, who will find that to be filling up their bucket as opposed to depleting them. So we focus a lot on that. And I think, we also encourage other teams to do the same.
I love that. And what's coming to mind for me is this approach that we take with our work, where do you either have the skill for it or the will for it? So when you bring up, like, if it brings you energy, maybe it is something that is a natural strength, or is it something that you're interested in and haven't done before? So I like that you guys are making that space for it. And this is also a really good reminder that I need to bring more internal team development within TypeCoach, because I keep getting poked by some team members that, Nicole, we want more TypeCoach. So thank you for the reminder.
You've got your marching orders.
Yes. Right. Absolutely.
I think the only thing that I'd add to it, and it's kind of a good theme across a lot of what we're talking about here today, is that when people are stressed on our team, we know that they're going to tend to go back to their default style of communication. And so it's harder to remember to do a lot of what we teach when you're feeling that stress. And so looking for the early stress signals on our team is something we're always paying attention to. How busy is this person? How maxed out are they? And then what are the things we know are going to be triggers for them that may not be triggers for us? And then when we all are feeling a little bit intense, recognizing we have to put extra energy into the communication piece when that's happening.
Yeah, that's really an interesting thing about stress. I mean, I don't know how many layers of the onion you want to get to today, Nicole, but it's really interesting what happens to each of the different personality types under stress, and how, depending on your type, you'll have different triggers and different responses to moderate stress and to extreme stress.
Yeah. And, Carly, I know, sorry to interrupt you. I know you and I both have the same personality type, ESTJ. Mm-hmm. To bring some like tangible application to it, could you give our folks an example of, when you and I are in stress mode, what does that look like as an ESTJ?
Definitely. So for ESTJs, the strongest of our middle letters of our type is thinker. So is T, thinker. And so that's the part of us that's, really good at being logical and objective, weighing the pros and cons, not taking things too personally, just kind of focusing on getting to moving things along, right? And when we get under moderate stress, what ends up happening is we forget to move. We have a hard time switching over to the opposite of that, which is feeler mode. And that's where we get our diplomacy from, and our ability to take into account everyone else's feelings and perspectives, making sure everyone feels on board, and making sure we're picking up the subtle undertones of the situation. And it's kind of like our brain just kind of over focuses on thinker mode and just kind of shuts out feeler mode. Normally we'd be flipping back and forth, and we could be people might even think we are a feeler. Like we can be what the situation calls for. That's when we're in the green zone. But under moderate stress of the yellow zone, not so much. And then interestingly, under extreme stress, which hopefully is not that often, but I think is more often the last couple of years during the pandemic than ever before. Then we call it the red zone, where you have your weakest part of your personality. So in our case, Nicole and I, it's feeler. is sort of the taking the wheel and sort of running the show. And the next thing you know, you're super emotional and taking
Oversensitive.
everything personally.
Yep.
And
Rob's
people
nodding his head. He's seen it.
people are like, what? I didn't mean anything by that. And you know, they know you would normally never care about something like that. But all of a sudden we feel unappreciated and all sorts of things. And then, so then we're emoting either in a angry way or in a sad way or a combo of the two. And it's, you know, it's lots of fun. But other types have a completely different response. It has nothing to do with feeler thinker, right? And they may be over on the sensor intuitive mode where they're flipping back and forth. Totally different experience. So in our stress program, we put people in the groups with the people who are like them, and they have, it's like a little support group, you know, and they really have a great time sharing examples of how they have gotten themselves back to balance and what works for them. And it's very different than what would work for someone in a different group.
Totally. And I think this is a great segue to highlight, Carly, what you shared earlier, that TypeCoach is not just the verifier. So for our listeners, that's the report that gives you your personality type, your 4-letter. It's very much self-informed in a different way than I think the MBTI assessment is. This allows you to have a little bit more ownership in seeing, you know, where you fall, recognizing that it's not, it's your natural preferences. So we all switch between them, each dimension, but it's like, where do you naturally fall? And that verifier report, getting that is just the tip of the iceberg. And with the TypeCoach online suite of tools that you guys have, type to type tool being one of those, where you can put your type up against another team members to see, you know, natural strengths, challenge areas that you guys may work through. In addition to that, it's the program that you guys offer and that I'm offering to our clients now, being TypeCoach certified, that for our viewers, we're giving you complimentary access to the online tools. And I want to highlight that because Carly already touched on it, but there's so much more to just knowing your type. It's utilizing it for bettering your work preferences and how you like your style of how you get your work done, and also sharing that with one another. I just want to highlight that because it's the unlock. You know, it's talking about it, it's using it in real time. And I'd love for you guys to share, you know, what comes with this promotion that we're offering our viewers with TypeCoach so they can live and feel it.
Absolutely. Well, the one thing we haven't touched on is the coaching videos. So you have 5 coaching videos that cover the top 5 secrets of success for your type. So we interviewed, you know, hundreds of leaders and learned what would make what has made the biggest difference for them, you know, of different types. So we talked to lots and lots of ENTPs and lots of ISFJs, and what really moved the needle for them in their career. These people were sort of at the top of their careers at the time. And so each one of these little 5-minute coaching videos for your type is covering either a strength that you would want to maximize or a challenge area, and lots of tips for improving in that area. And then we're inviting everyone to the open registration influence program that we offer on a regular basis. So basically it's happening on a regular basis, and people can join at a time that works well for them to learn the skills of how do you figure out people's types, and then how do you adapt your communication to adjust for that.
I love it. And I was so excited when, you know, we connected to hear what can we provide our listeners that's a bit unique and special for them. And this, you know, we agreed that this is such a great foundation for leaders to get, you know, the true immersive experience of TypeCoach. So they're not just hearing us talk about it, but they get to, you know, live and breathe it before they bring it to their team. And, you know, I come in and facilitate that for them in that group setting, because as you guys know as well as I do, it looks and feels pretty darn cool to have everyone in the same room talking type, talking preferences, and being comfortable about it, you know, first and foremost.
Absolutely. And all of the companies that we are working with want to have like a private session for the people at their company. But the open registration version is for people who are in a position, sort of 1 or 2 people at an organization, to evaluate whether this is a fit for what they're looking for at their organization, to bring in, you know, you as a facilitator to do a session with their group. Because a lot of the value comes from those breakout discussions that people have in the session with the people that are working at their same organization. In our open registration version, though, you're with a whole bunch of people who are sort of in a position to evaluate TypeCoach at their various organizations. So it's really kind of a fun global crew of HR people, L&D managers, leaders, consultants, coaches. And we have, it's on Zoom and they're in breakout sessions and it's super interactive, and it's really our signature course. So it's a great opportunity. It's got 3 webinars. You can attend all 3, or you can come to the first couple. It's one of those things where you just pick the dates, and then if you can't make the date, you can pick another date. Where it's an ongoing offering.
And it's ongoing because they fill up. Let me tell you that from personal experience.
Mm-hmm.
So get it while you can. You will find that on the toolkit that we are offering our listeners. And you can do so by scanning the QR code that you're seeing on screen right now. So that'll take you to the Perspectives toolkit. So not just strictly TypeCoach is included in there, but if you recall from our first episode with Michelle Anhang, also talking with Amanda Lobo in our second episode, how do we bring the whole person to the forefront in the hybrid workplace? We touch on that in this toolkit. We provide you what we're calling a personal user manual, where we get to talk about our pet peeves, deal breakers, preferred communication style. So you can come up with that on your own before TypeCoach. But if you are looking for that more holistic, comprehensive approach to getting everyone on the same playing field when it comes to type and preferences, TypeCoach has a above and beyond, call it personal user manual, that we would provide you with some action planning tips in there as well. So to highlight that again, we have some insight into how leaders can bring more intentionality to their approach and bring the whole person to work. We have some tips in there, as well as how to collaborate better with one another by starting with our preferences and sharing that with one another and using TypeCoach to do so. So I am super thankful that I was able to get you guys on here. I know you just got back from Costa Rica, and really appreciate you guys making the space for today. And yeah, I'm very thankful. And I want to leave our viewers with one lightning round question. And for those who heard our last episode, I asked Amanda this one, but I'd love for you guys to answer this about each other. So my question for you is,
I'm not scared at all.
Carly, this question's for you to answer about Rob. So I want you to think of one quality that you admire about Rob and fill in the blank here. Okay.
I admire Rob's optimism. So he is someone who's constantly coming up with great ideas. He's like sort of a visionary strategist, and he's very optimistic about a lot of these ideas and vision and strategy, and he gets very excited about it. So I admire that.
I love that. If the world were more like Rob, the world would be more optimistic. All right.
Wow.
And passing the baton to Rob, can you top that is the question. What about Carly?
So, well, we talk a lot about the greatest strengths that the different personalities bring, and Carly is like the Uber example of really intelligent decision making, and so she's the go-to person among all of her friends when they're in a complex situation, they're not sure what to do. It's just really easy for her to go click, 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 click. This is the right answer. And I have tremendous admiration because that's not how my brain works. So just watching her operate it's a beautiful thing.
And Nicole, you're the same personality type, so you're probably pretty decisive, logical decision maker.
Let's get to a solution. Absolutely. It's a good reminder that I need to, tap into my feeler mode of, okay, maybe this friend or colleague needs just sympathy and they don't need, a solution. So that's definitely something that I've been working on.
That's a stretch area, right? For sure, for me.
Yeah. And we mean well with both, right?
That's right.
It's just how we're wired, and that's all right. Well, awesome. Thank you guys so much for being here. It was such a pleasure having you, Carly, you, Rob, on today's session. And before we wrap up, I want to echo again this toolkit because you don't want to miss it. You can find it using the QR code that was shared earlier, or you can also go to Thoughtium.com/perspectives. That toolkit will give you that personal user manual access, as well as the access codes you need to get into the TypeCoach complimentary tools that we're providing you all. So thank you all so much, and we look forward to our next Navigating Now episode.
Thanks, Nicole. Thanks for having us. This was a lot of fun.
Totally agreed.
Thank you.